Hi, everybody. It's Greg, one of the co-founders at Career.pm. Welcome to the second episode in our Off the Cuff series. Today, I am talking to Steve Johnson. I will let him introduce himself a bit. He's been in product management circles forever. We spoke the other day on another topic and started to have some good conversation, and I put the brakes on that and asked him if we could just have a free-form conversation about whatever is on our minds. And Steve is always game for that kind of thing. So Steve, maybe you want to tell us just a couple of words about who you are, what you do. And my first question for you is, what is on your mind lately? What is keeping you up? What is getting your shower cycles, from a PM perspective?
Gotcha. Well, I've been around product management for decades. I majored in marketing and minored in computer science back in university, and then couldn't get a job. So I had to choose. I was a programmer for a while, and then I had a couple of other jobs and then stumbled into product management and found out that that's actually what I had kind of learned in college in the marketing classes that I'd taken. So in the early 90s, a buddy of mine started pragmatic marketing and a few years later called me and I became the first instructor. I did that for 15 years. And then about 10 years ago, I started coaching teams in a much more intimate way than just training. I mean, doing real application coaching. And it's really woken me up to the dysfunction that is product management today. So,
Interesting.
which kind of leads into what we were talking about the other day, this whole nonsense about work-life balance when work and life are happening in the same house.
Yeah,
I was
interesting.
having a chat yesterday with a lovely woman, and she was really doing a very good job of keeping focused, except for the fact that she had a baby on her arm. And, it's been years since I've had a baby as well, but the baby's squirming and reaching and all this stuff, and it was kind of amazing that she was able to hold a coherent conversation with me. But we ran out of time, and then she said, hey, can we reconnect tomorrow? And I went, sure. And I said, here's some times I'm available, and she shared her calendar, and I I couldn't believe it. I mean, she's booked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 30-minute slices the entire time, and is also dealing with the child at home. I mean, I don't know how she keeps her sanity.
Yeah,
And so it seems like, everybody's like, hey, this is great. You get to work from home and the flexibility that I've always had when working from home, except if we're booked 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, when do you have a chance to think? It seems like she has to be spending her entire day doing task switching and all
yeah.
the overhead that goes with it.
Yeah, even before COVID, even before people were working at home, I know when I was a PM, I would say half my schedule was triple booked.
Hmm.
Somebody I worked with then coined that as a denial of service attack. It really changed the way I look at it. My stakeholders were so interested in my time that they were keeping me from doing anything productive. And at the end of the day, I paid the price. So
Hmm.
I had the same experience, was doing a coaching session yesterday, and she said, let me just show you my calendar and maybe you can help me figure out where I can recoup some time. And sure enough, every day, I don't think there was really a 30-minute slot in core business hours anywhere. And that brings a couple of things to mind. One is, you will not be successful if you're on that kind of treadmill. And we've probably
Hmm.
all seen people in our careers who found a way around that, who were just willing to say no and clear time, who were very clear about
Hmm.
what they wanted to achieve and only dedicated time to those things. I think some good guidance is to try to kind of treat your calendar the way a salesperson does. A salesperson, every time they talk to you, they make a judgment in the first few seconds whether this is going to generate revenue or not. And if it doesn't, they move on very quickly.
Hmm.
That's slightly
Hmm.
overstated, but instead of
Good point.
revenue, Yeah, you need to think about your goals. Is engaging in this activity going to help me demonstrate, that I'm achieving what I choose to achieve? And the other thing is, I think you know this about me, Steve, I have authority issues, and I take it back to just a huge leadership fail.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of that today. You mentioned this work-life balance. A lot of supposed leaders talking out both sides of their mouths, talking about
Hmm.
how they want, work-life balance is important. And if you need this, you read articles about companies that do all these seemingly generous things. And
Hmm.
without fail in my career, when I peek behind the curtain, when I talk to somebody, it's BS.
Hmm.
I won't say the
Yeah, I
word.
want you to have work-life balance. Oh, by the way, there's a company-wide meeting tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And you're
And
like,
we will
oh,
need you to talk to the
okay.
folks in China at 7 o'clock at night or in Australia or whatever it is.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So, to the people listening, kind of individual contributors who are overloaded like that, you have to learn to say no. I'm writing a blog post with another PM here in Germany about that right now. We hear a lot about saying no to new features, and that's important. But as a product manager, if you don't learn to say no with your time, you will fail. You won't have a chance
Hmm.
to serve customers well and do all those other things. And you have to really develop almost a reputation as somebody whose time is super precious and is hard to get.
Hmm.
And for the leaders listening, people who are managing people, people who are leading organizations, most of you are failing miserably in terms of taking care of your folks, making sure that they don't get burnt out. And what I am hearing from people is, yeah, there's just no governance around meetings. Anybody can
Hmm.
call a meeting anytime. In a lot of these organizations, that is the only place you can get information. If you're not at the meeting, you lose it. Minutes aren't taken, things aren't
Hmm.
available everywhere else. So you're just trapping people. You're failing as a leader and all the time,
Hmm.
probably out talking yourself up about how progressive you are and how you take care of your people. Shame
But
on you if you're in that
they're also
situation.
victims themselves. Their calendar is forple booked or fipple booked, if that, I know neither of those are words, but
Yeah.
they're part of the problem. It's like, wow, I don't know how anybody can, well, you you're there already. I mean, they're part of the problem in that they can't control their calendar. And I've said for years, if you're not in control of your calendar, you're not in control.
Yeah,
And I like
absolutely.
your metaphor of, hey, sales guy says, is this about revenue, yay or nay? That's a pretty good rule. The other thing that I've always done is look for redundancy in meetings. I remember I went to a meeting, I was a VP, and I looked in the room, and my director was in the room. And I looked at him and I said, "Why are you here?" And he's like, "Well, why are you here?" And so then the person came in and said, "Oh, I wanted you both here." And it was, I don't know, 8 or 10 or 12 people. And I turned to the person who called the meeting and I said, "Which one of us is leaving?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "We don't both
Yeah.
need to be here." And she said, "Well, I need you to hear because you can make decisions. You're the top of the chain."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "Okay, then Bruce can leave." And she said, "Oh, no, 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 I need Bruce because he actually knows stuff." And
Okay.
I'm like, "I'll tell you what, Bruce has my authority to make decisions. I'm leaving."
Yeah.
And
Very
she
nice.
was super upset, but it's
Yeah.
hard enough to schedule your life, and then if you've got redundancy in each meeting, that's even worse. And I
Yeah.
think
So yeah.
there's power in being able to say only one person from my department needs to be in this meeting.
Yeah. And nobody is going to empower you to do that, people. Empower yourself and
Hmm.
just say no. And, we should probably move on, but, a couple of things that I've seen work really
That's a hot
well.
button for both of us.
Yeah. 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 One is I've never seen this implemented well. I think IBM has a patent because somebody I used to work with filed it. It would generate a bill for a meeting based on some hourly rate for everybody that was
Hmm.
there. So if an
I've seen
individual
that.
contributor is 100 an hour, a director might be 300 an hour, and there's a bill. So people, have no incentive to manage things if that kind of data isn't brought forth. And something that I mentioned to Steve the other day is I did a long engagement with a client in Houston ages ago. And in meetings, they always empowered one person. They were called the ditch person. It's kind of an English thing. And their job was to keep people out of the ditch, meaning keep people on topic. And these people were empowered. It wasn't like some big person in the organization. It could just be, whatever, whoever was willing to
Hmm.
do it. And they were empowered when things got off track to say, stop this thread, stop talking. This is not relevant. Let's get back on topic. So that's a couple of things that may help people. But in the end, if you don't have leadership who are willing to create a culture where, time is valued and meetings are, the exception, you as an individual contributor, you're just stuck. So I see it fundamentally as a leadership problem, and I hope somebody is
I
listening
would
and will
agree.
do something about it today.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So that is kind of rant number one. I'm yeah, the other day when we were talking, I think something that came up that was really interesting was this whole concept of role definition. I think we were talking a little bit about, how product managers suffer. We talked about this yesterday. We did an Ask Us Anything, a little kind of event we do where we take questions. We were talking about imposter syndrome. And Steve, you made the point that product managers are probably particularly susceptible to imposter syndrome because in many organizations, our role is so poorly defined.
Hmm.
So it leaves this gray area, which we fill with fear and unrealistic expectations.
Hmm.
Uh,
And you
so
know what? To extend the last point, and you don't know what meetings you should say no to if you don't know what your job
hello.
is.
Yeah.
I was doing a thing on Reddit the other day, and somebody popped in and said, I'm in this new role. My boss doesn't seem to know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm terrified that I'm going to be fired. And I thought, is this typical? I mean, are people frequently in positions where they have no idea? And the truth of the matter is, yeah, according to some survey data I found, about 20 only 20% of product management organizations have clear understanding of roles and responsibilities. And from our past conversations that I'm just super passionate about roles, and I say stuff that just freak people out because I'm like, that isn't your job, and it's not that I don't want to be a helpful person, but I was doing a meeting a while back. There were 9 people in the room, and I was kind of dissing on sales, which I kind of have a reputation for doing. I come from a culture of really good salespeople, and so when I encounter bad selling, it just blows my
Hmm.
mind.
Hmm.
And uh, so, oh, so I was talking about in product management, going on sales calls is not your job. And finally, I said it 3 or 4 times, and I had a few jabs at salespeople in there. Anyway, finally, one of the guys said, "Well, Steve, I don't hate salespeople like you do." And I'm like, "Dude, I don't hate salespeople. I hate bad salespeople. Um, and you're not doing product management." And he's like, "But I like doing these things. I like doing demos. I like going on sales calls. I like traveling. I like getting drunk with
Hmm.
sales guys after a meeting." And I'm like, "Great. I think those are all wonderful things, but it's not product management.
Yeah.
It's sales engineering."
Hey, hello.
And
Yeah.
right. And I had a similar conversation with a sales rep. And he said, "But, Steve, gosh, product managers are great on sales calls." And I'm like, "They really are, but it's not their job. It's sales engineering." And he's like, "I know, but I always like to take a product manager on a sales call because they're so great." And I'm like, "Yes, they are great, but it's not their job." And he's like, "But they're so good at it." And went back and forth like 10 times on this discussion where we were both right. Product managers are good on sales calls, and going on sales calls is not product management. And a
Yeah.
lot of people try to reverse engineer it, and they say, "Well, at least I get to engage with customers." And that's true, but you shouldn't. I mean, you're not there to validate a concept or share a roadmap or do customer discovery. You're there to sell. And so, go into sales engineering mode, but you're not being a sales engineer. And so what I ended up doing was 3 of the guys in this team said, "I really like these functions that you say are not product management." And I said, "Then I think we should do that." And the issue they had was they did not have sales engineering. the VP and I said, why don't we make these three folks who like this kind of work, make them sales engineers for all the products, and then the other six product managers can do
Oh,
product
cool.
management.
Yeah, there you go. Some people may not have a background in organizations that have a sales force, but in a lot of organizations, sales goes out and just creates interest, starts building a relationship, but doesn't have the depth to really address whether the solution is appropriate. They may not really understand the product that well. So they very quickly have to hand off to somebody who really knows what's going on. And if that's a product manager, it's a decision that has to be made,
Hmm.
but it has to be made in light of the fact that you will suffer in the rest of your job, which is already more than full-time work. Just
Hmm.
defining the product, just feeding engineering the requirements they need to keep them going is a lot of work. So if you're spending a
Hmm.
lot of your time building collateral, being on calls, you're setting yourself up to fail. And this is another management thing.
Hmm.
If you're just not willing to hire a sales engineer, where I was going a minute ago is there's this role called sales engineering. And while the name is technical and they tend to be technical people, they are the ones that have this broader perspective on customer needs, on what the product can do to meet those over time. They get great experience. So if you're moving into a role that has sales engineering and you weren't familiar with it, they can be a huge ally as a product
Hmm.
manager. I would
Oh, I agree.
Consultants and sales engineers are really the best proxies you will find, at least for your customers and probably for the market, the broader market. They get pulled into new opportunities. But yeah, you as a product manager, back to, I guess everything is interrelated, right? Back to this idea
Hmm.
of knowing what is going to make you successful. And if the organization says we measure success by the number of deals that you help close, then I guess you should take that into account. I can tell you from experience, in every case, I will look at the kind of product definition function. Product management won't be there. Engineering is picking up the slack, and I will end up with a
Hmm.
very kind of problem looking for a solution kind of scenario over time. I've
Absolutely.
just seen it time and time and time again.
Yeah, it's a domino thing, right? If the I remember years ago, I was talking to, I guess I was talking to one of the sales guys, and he said, "Oh yeah, engineering is just fundamentally broken." And so I went to engineering, and I said, "Well, what's going on with you guys?" And they're like, "Well, to be honest with you, we're having a hard time finding bandwidth to work on features because we're spending so much time in support." And
Hmm.
I'm like, what does that mean? And so I go to support and I say, why are you spending, why is development doing half of your job? And they said, oh, well, we really struggle because we don't really have time for support now that we're also doing demos for customers. And I'm like, wait a minute, you shouldn't be doing demos for customers. The sales engineer should be doing that.
Yeah.
And then I found out that the sales engineers were understaffed. And so, because sales demanded support, demos from support, support couldn't do support, so development did support. And these actions way down the chain with sales resulted in completely stifling the development cycle.
Yeah.
And they're like, Why can't you guys ship?" And it's like, well, because we're so busy doing other people's work, we haven't had time to do our own.
Yeah. Another symptom of leadership, I think, that just doesn't
Hmm.
understand how product development is supposed to happen, the roles that should be involved. I had a
It does seem
thought.
that nobody really seems to understand, nobody in leadership seems to understand the mechanics of how software is made, in
Yeah,
my experience.
which is super spooky. Two
Yeah.
folks who really need to understand it are HR and leadership, and very rarely can they lay
Hmm.
out. So if you have leadership in your organization that's actually been there and done that, maybe they've been PMs or led engineering organizations,
Hmm.
consider yourself lucky because they usually get it. And,
Hmm.
I want to close on a point. We're talking about leadership. We were talking about time management and all these things. That if your organization is in a constant state of being overwhelmed, it's just a leadership fail. That's the only way
Hmm.
I can put it. I can find companies that are in highly competitive industries that are being disruptive, who are not playing defense on their calendar all the time. It is a symptom of a much
Hmm.
deeper dysfunction, which is you are not in control. You
Right.
are not able to prioritize your work. I worked at, a smaller company, and I called it a chrysocracy. They could
Mm-hmm.
really only get anything done if somebody was lobbing grenades at them,
Mm-hmm.
if there wasn't a crisis. And sometimes in those organizations, it's so crazy to get people to do things. Sometimes you have to manufacture a crisis to get people to step up, but it's a leadership fail,
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt.
Absolutely.
And the older I get, the more I see kind of, all paths leading to, we've got a bunch of people out there who are not even great managers and really are almost zeros when it comes to, being true product leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Well, there's a concept in manufacturing called an expediter. And what an expediter does is bypass all process to get an order out.
hmm hmm
But if every order has to be expedited, then you have a production problem. And I think that's an interesting metaphor for what you're talking about. If everything has to be dealt with as a crisis, if everything is an exception, if um, every time we do anything it's an emergency, then we've got some serious procedural problems. And, to your point, leadership problems as well.
yeah,
Nothing seems
definitely.
hard to people who don't actually have to do it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to go, I don't know, go to my happy place. I'm gonna have to do some deep breathing. When I think about this stuff, it drives me half crazy. Uh, yeah, so just to kind of close things out, I don't know how long this conversation will go. Something that came up that occurred to me while we were talking, I've been thinking a lot is, my background is in B2B, and I have to admit that, so let me lay the groundwork. Being a product manager in a big B2B company that's solving complex problems is way different than being a product manager in a kind of internet consumer oriented business where you're trying to
Mhm,
get somebody to install an app and do something
mhm,
relatively simple. And I have to admit that, for a long time I was pretty arrogant, condescending that, yeah, I want to write an app that's going to help me find a good restaurant. Oh, that sounds so difficult. I've grown up recently and realized that, yeah, they're both equally hard, just for completely different
mhm.
reasons.
Right.
And
They are.
I just think it's an interesting thing. I think it's getting to the point that it's really hard to talk about. There is a common core, but anything meaningful procedurally, in terms of technique or practice, it's hard to talk about it without first thinking, what is the context? Are you in a B2B company? Are you in a B2C company?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, like, yeah, do you feel that becoming more an issue? I'm just curious how you feel about these two extremes of the continuum and the equally difficult but different challenges they face.
Well, the stuff that I tend to encounter is the same, B2B versus B2C. Most of my work is still B2B, where the selling process is so complex.
hmm
There's multiple buyers involved, and there's committees making decisions, and there's even a team of salespeople doing the selling. And if you go to the other end of the spectrum and say, hey, this is something we promote and people download and install, there's no salespeople involved. In either case, we still need process. And what I've encountered is when I start talking to people about process, even the people who are supposedly following it don't actually know what the process is.
Hmm.
And so, I'll have a conversation like, how do we do this thing, whatever it is, and they'll start describing stuff, and then they'll start arguing with one another. It's like, no, 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 you're describing something else. And like in the old days, it was so funny. People would say, well, here's what we typically put in an MRD, a marketing requirements document. And they start listing it out, and then the argument would begin. No, 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 that's a product requirements document. They start arguing, just
Yeah.
taking those things. They're like, no, 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 that's an SRS. That's a systems requirements
Wow, I
specification.
haven't heard that acronym in a long time, Steve.
And it's still true, except we all use, you can tell from the conversation what training classes they've taken or what books they've read,
Right.
you know. But what my focus has been is I can't believe I've encountered so many organizations where the process is convoluted and overblown and over engineered that my whole concept is, and the name of my company is, you should be able to do this in under 10 steps. You should be able to do it in under 10 artifacts.
Hmm.
You should be working on under 10 things.
Sure.
Right? You should book under 10 hours per day, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Very nice.
And I think everybody's just trying to do too much. So what I've found is we start mapping these things out. The major difference I see between B2B and B2C is in B2B, sales has a really big club. Sales is really politically strong.
Yeah.
And in B2C companies, development seems to be politically strong.
Mm.
Uh, and but in both cases, the product manager is supposed to be representing the market and not being support for either development or sales.
Yeah.
And that's where I get involved. It's just so astounding to me the number of companies that I work in, and I'd say it's like 90+% where the first thing they need to do is get clarity on roles and responsibilities because the product managers aren't doing product management. They're
Yeah.
either doing project management for development or they're doing sales engineering for sales.
Yeah. I always tell people, only half jokingly, that once you've been a consultant for several years, you're amazed that anybody is making money. Because when you go inside these organizations, it just seems like it's the, lunatics running the asylum. I think that was a fascinating topic. I would like to dig into this kind of B2B, B2C thing a little bit more. I think it's really relevant because at Career PM, we do a lot of training and coaching. And yeah, very quickly after you get beyond kind of the basics of defining a strategy, what a roadmap is, and all these things, I think it makes sense to already have an idea which direction you want to go so you can optimize, so that you can understand those challenges. Anyway, it was, as always, super fun talking to you. I hope this isn't the last time we do this. I would like to pick up some of these topics. I'm sure by the next time we talk, we will have a new host of, yeah, things to complain about, things that are bothering us. Maybe next time we try to do something positive, like what do we see that's, really
It's
working?
working.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What are
totally.
some,
Totally. And we're in danger of being, the old guys who are just shouting at kids in the street, hey kids, stay off my lawn.
yeah,
Um, but,
true.
or well, back in my day,
Yeah.
but
When I was a young PM.
I find
Yeah.
so many people who are frustrated in their roles, and yet product management is such a great role if the expectations and the OKRs are clear.
Yeah.
So that would be a good conversation for the next time around.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Steve. We'll catch up soon.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.